So good to see you again. It's been too long.
Yeah. Well, I thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. My great, good pleasure. And in the audience, welcome very much to Conversations. Our guest for this program is Nellie Hester Bailey, and she's well known in New York. She's been on the scene, as it were, for a very long time. We're going to be talking about that. She's got a report called the Black Agenda Report that she's very committed to, and she's also the director and longtime director of the Harlem Tenants Council. And Nellie, welcome so much to Conversations once again. We've done programs in the past, but we can bring things up to date, and welcome.
Well, Harold, thank you again for inviting me.
It's my pleasure to do so. Share with us your background a little bit, Nellie. I know you've been involved in tenants' rights for a long time up in Harlem, but share your background, maybe a little of your education, that sort of thing, and then we can talk about things from a perspective perhaps of Harlem, but the human condition, the political, economic realities, the way we see things. But if you could share your background.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we can quickly move into the politics of things today.
Okay.
I am co-founder of the Harlem Tenants Council. We founded this organization, tenant-led leadership, grassroots. What we are looking at is grassroots activism based on the social justice struggle of self-determination and empowerment of tenants to be a partner at the table to negotiate how communities are developed. And so we've been around for a long time.
Yes, decades.
Well, actually, since 1994.
Oh, okay.
So we do tenant organizing. We do a little bit of public policy stuff and analysis. We have a radio program on one of the local stations in Harlem, WHCR 90.3 FM, that airs out of City College. In terms of my background, before that, I am a student of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and that was in the 60s.
Did you know Stokely Carmichael?
Absolutely, I surely did. And
Stokely was a dear friend of mine.
Yeah, well, he was a dear friend. Kwame Ture, of so many people, yes, and his unfortunate and untimely death.
Yeah, right. I remember him very fondly. And the thing I remember about him is really strange, because I know he was very politically and everything involved. I remember him for being so funny. He had a sense of humor that would not quit. And yet at the same time, he was very, very committed. He was a real stand-up person. And,
absolutely. So getting back to those SNCC days, I was one of the many students whom they organized all over the South. There was a project in Lowndes County, Alabama, with working with tenement farmers.
What year would that have been, maybe?
This would
62,
have been
63?
No,
not that far.
I only started. This would have been in 67, 68.
Oh, okay, yeah, right. Okay.
So
you were from here, though? You were in New York?
No.
You were down
I am a daughter of the South. I was born and raised in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Wow.
It's a university town. I attended a land grant college. It had light industry, and of course it was the apartheid South at that time, as so much of America continues to be even today.
Do you know Coley Clark by any chance?
Yes, I do know Coley Clark. I count her as one of my good and dearest friends.
Well, she's producing over here now, and I got her over here. I love Coley Clark, and she and Stokely used to have a great time back in the old day down Mississippi when it was just getting started, 62 and all that. She's a hardcore good lady.
She was on the staff. I was a student at the time, so our interaction would have been very, very different. I was never on staff. I was just one of hundreds of students organized throughout the South at that time.
She happens to be in Libya at the moment. I talked to her earlier the week and everything. She's in Libya at a conference. And I told her that I'd been over there about 8 times. That's where I used to meet with Stokely when he was living in Guinea. He had moved to Guinea. And he would come there. Of course, it was Kwame Ture. but she's over there in Libya, and I told her to bring back a report on how things are going. Have you been in touch with Libya at all, or were you or not? Stokely was.
No, I
Okay.
never visited the
You didn't?
country. I am aware of the politics of it, and
Yeah.
of course, we all know the attempt of the American government to demonize not only Gaddafi but the country itself.
Yeah.
And we've had a little bit of progression since that time, but that remains pretty much unabated. So I've never visited the country.
I was very taken with it. I think I thought of them for a while. I don't want to go off on attack, but it might be relevant, may not be. But I thought of them. They got started in about 1970. It was about 2 weeks after the moon of the Woodstock Festival, back in that period of 1970, or the stepping on the moon and that sort of. It was a major rend in the society. I would submit back then, and they got started in September of 1970. First thing they did was, when he took power in a bloodless coup with no deaths and everything, they made the United States abandon their, which was then I think the largest SAC base in the world at Wheelus Air Force, and forced them out of the country. Also got the OPEC going, and so he developed a bad boy reputation among the American people. But they then set the country up in a very interesting way that I always thought might well have been historically relevant to the way things are set up in the world in this time, to the United States setting up a system that stood in distinction to the feudal system in Europe in 1776, that he had a view of the future which we require. So I had great inspiration by him. I've lost touch, but we did a program with him and so forth. So anyway, I got a great feel. I've been about 8 times to that country. I think they possibly were in a leadership role, politically and economically and ideologically. I'm not sure, but just mention it as a thought. She's there anyway. She'll be back next week, so we ought to get together. Anyway, so you were involved in that, and then you got, the tenants thing, you got involved in that later. That's later up, and that's mostly in Harlem, or was it mostly in New York City that kind of work was done?
It was mostly in Harlem, but
Yeah.
once one starts doing tenant organizing, then you are literally in every borough, because you know the tentacles of the tenant rights movement and the awful situation tenants find themselves in.
Right.
We got calls from Brooklyn, the Bronx. So it was, but our concentration, just to be clear, was primarily in Harlem.
Yeah. And when did you get involved in those tenant rights issues?
That would have been at the time that the Columbia Tenants Union, when I kept that on after the death of my husband, Bruce Bailey.
Yes.
So that would have been about 1987.
Okay.
I became more involved than previously.
And and you'd been involved in the civil rights thing before that.
Oh yes, very definitely.
Right. And they're interconnected and everything. Yeah.
Yes, I think social movements are interconnected.
Yes, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then when did you come north, as it were, from down south?
That would have been in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
Late 60s,
and
early 70s.
you were fired up.
Well, I think
part
we
of the
were.
movement.
I think we were all fired up.
Yeah.
So many things were happening at the time.
Right.
We were coming out of the movement, not only of the South, but there was the formation of or rather the organizing of the Black Panther Party.
Right.
In LA on the East Coast. There were movements all over in that period of the coming out of the 60s, the civil rights movement. And here in New York City, although I was not a part of it, there was the formation of the Young Lords and a sense of pride and nationalism that not only aroused arouse the passion, but inspired organizing work around issue of housing, police brutality, these issues that are still with us today.
And you were very involved in that with your husband at the time.
Well, I was very involved in the tenants movement with him.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, and it works in. And so, would you think of yourself then as a progressive force, involved with progressive, or what would the basis of your political view of things be based upon? Who were some of the people you might have read and be inspired by in terms of the intellectual community writ large?
Yeah, well, I would like to think of myself as a bit more than a progressive, but as representing or embracing left politics. Certainly, the people whom I have read and who've inspired me toward my political forming my political ideology. Of course, one reads the classics, Marx and Engels. One also reads another great influence, Fanon. And other influence, of course, W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, Malcolm X. Claudia Jones, who was a communist in Harlem and who was deported to London, to Europe. There, of course, Paul Robeson, a giant of a man and a figure. More so on the local front, there were people like Esther Jackson of the Freedom Ways. Just any number of people. I can go on and on and on. And of course, Ella Baker, who was so central to the civil rights movement in the South and her leadership, and of course Dr. King as well, and his inspiration not only to the movement, I said Malcolm previously, but also to the nation itself in terms of arousing or attempting to arouse its moral consciousness.
Absolutely.
So I think that those figures are very important, and if I didn't, also James Baldwin. Very enlightened man who added immeasurably to the dialogue on race, Shirley Graham Du Bois as well. So any number of folks, there are undoubtedly so many that I've left out.
I know, it's hard to do them all. And there was a whole panoply of people. And it was, I think, back in the 60s, and there was a sort of a magic moment or something. There was so much going on, and things were stirred up, and things were really moving in an interesting way. I sometimes get a little bit upset that maybe we're losing some of the juice, as they would say, from that moment, that time. Just one sidebar. Are you familiar with Florence Rice?
Of course.
Florence Rice is an angel.
Yes,
I love
she is.
Florence
She's been
Rice.
on my radio program numerous times.
I love that lady. She's the queen of public access. She's been doing public access television since it began. And
not only public access, but also her long history of consumerism and consumer rights. I mean, she is a legend, I think, far beyond Harlem and also in D.C. And she has led that fight and that struggle for so long.
If you should talk to her before me, give her my very best regards. I love the lady fiercely. She's really good and everything. So that was something that was going on. And then you became involved also, if I'm not mistaken, you've got this Black Agenda report. Now that's something more recent and so forth. And
they have been around. Black Agenda report has been around for number of years, not a very long time, but certainly enough to earn its reputation. I am so proud to be part of this organization of some of the leading Black intellectuals. Voices in this country: Glenn Ford, Margaret Kimberly, Bruce Dixon of Atlanta, Georgia, who was in fact one of the first reporters to break the story on the prison strike in Atlanta and throughout the South as it grew.
When would that have been?
This was just recently, only months ago, when the prisoners went on strike, and they organized by cell phones and They went on strike because of the forced labor that they have to endure. They are
back to the chain gang, huh?
And this is even more worse than the chain gang, because I think so, because it's an exploitation by corporate America. We can get free labor.
Yeah, right.
You're going to make clothes, you're going to make license plates, and it's all free.
Slave labor.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think what was so significant about this strike was the coalition, not the coalition, but the collaboration of both black and white prisoners who saw and recognized their common interest, and they organized together.
Isn't that heartening? That
yes, I think it is.
Camaraderie there.
I meant, you know, an example of real class struggle. So that was, I thought, very important and significant on the social justice landscape, because what is generally dismissed as the lumpen class, in fact, has represented particularly since the decimations of unions and what's happening with workers, a new trend and a new wave of what we can begin to see with respect to workers' rights, in that we are in prison, we do have rights, and you cannot force us into this slave labor. We have to be compensated. I mean, the way they did captured Africans, free labor, and this this social construct of corporate free labor in the 21st century.
Right, right. That was something. Yeah, I'm from Detroit, and my daddy was a lawyer, and they had Henry Ford used to tinker in my grandmother's garage when he was about 10 years old, before he set up the assembly line. And they set up this automobile industry that became very much a place where people coming off the farms, turn of the century, 1920, the major occupation was family farmer. People were family farmers, and there was a lifestyle that you'd be on the land, and then there came industrialization of the farming and so forth, and we got down to about 2% of the population are farmers, and people came to the cities, a big migration to the jobs that were there and so forth. And then they get the union movements. It was hard. My granddaddy was a union leader way back at turn of the century, but there weren't unions then. It was a guild. He was a lithographer, but they had a but the unions now, it seems to me, the union movement, which maybe reached a peak or something, but in the private sector, it seems to me that the representation's only down to about 5 or 6% of the private sector is unionized.
Yeah, I think
and the
it's
union
7%.
Movement,
And then
that's a
not
bad trend
only
from
the
35,
decimation
40,
of the unions, but we also have deindustrialization and the rise of the corporate or Wall Street.
Plutocrats.
Yeah, right.
We
have this new oligarchy that has redefined the economic landscape of the U.S.
You think it's a new oligarchy? The modern
the form of its exploitation of capital. That's what I'm talking about. The form of its exploitation of capital. Since deindustrialization, we've lost our manufacturing base for the most part in this country. And when you look at that landscape nowadays, what we are manufacturing is mostly military hardware. But this country produces...
And don't forget, if I may, we've got a prison industrial complex. It's a growth industry.
Yes, that's exactly...
Black everybody up.
That's exactly why the prison
strike... The two are linked, I think.
That is exactly why the prison strike is so significant with respect to the prison industrial complex.
Right.
And now in this country, we have our economy is based on about 70% consumption and not production. And we know that no nation can survive without producing anything but worthless paper and with the money that has no value. And certainly we saw that very clearly in the economic collapse that we are having now that continues, economic recession.
Yeah, something that's recent. We had it was Weimar Germany, it became where they were just sweeping money down the sewer because it had no value at all. It hasn't come to that extent yet, I think, here, but we're in the trouble. What do you think it is that's caused the United States to drift, if that's the right term, in globalization and trade agreements? China seems to produce everything that we buy anymore, it seems, and the trade. What is it that led to the United States acquiescing to or accepting that kind of a situation where everything manufactured is overseas, where they can pay literally slave wages and just have no environmental controls at all? It's a paradise for people who want to exploit.
I don't think it's a matter of them accepting it. I think it is a fact that they designed it.
The people who run the system do, but that the society as a whole accept that our political leadership, such as it is, or those who would speak for the people, didn't have some sort of an opposition to this drift of free market plunder, as it were, that's taken place over these last few decades.
I think that there has always been opposition. I think the point is how much opposition we were not able to organize or see materialize, because clearly it was, I mean, even objectively not in the interest of the majority of the people, most of whom are working class people, not the 2% oligarchy that in fact controls this wealth, of which that 2% was able to pressure, not pressure, but I think President Barack Obama has always been in agreement with the Republican agenda, as we're beginning to see more and more of that. Is that they were able to carry off the extension of the tax cut for the 2% of the wealthiest people in this country for, in exchange, a quid pro quo of an extension of 13 months of unemployment for the most part. And then, of course, the treaty that passed. And I think that is a sorry example of the failure of the two-party system. We can leave out the Republicans, but the spinelessness or the supine position, posturing of the Democratic Party. So I think that's part of it. But getting back to your relevant point, why did so many people go acquiesce to this? I think it is because the U.S. elite or the political establishment has always worked its magic when it comes to divide and conquer of the working people in this country. And I think that we are certainly now seeing the results of that now, as we are witnessing the decline in the standard of living of quote, the middle class, unquote, and then, of course, the housing crisis itself with the foreclosures and the fraud that was perpetrated by the banks. And then coupled with the fact that why would the American people go along with the U.S. government, and this is even under President Barack Obama, spending nearly $1 trillion a year for war, and this does not include the domestic terrorism program that we Homeland Security. It does not include foreign aid. It does not include funding for veteran affairs, and we're talking about nearly $1 trillion a year for wars, and we are seeing these wars that are expanding. Now the U.S. is in Yemen, it's in Afghanistan, it's in Pakistan. We just had troops just recently this week who died in Iraq, and we were told, in fact, that the U.S. had pulled out, when in fact clearly they have not. If so, why did we have, I think it was 3 or 4 U.S. soldiers killed in Iraq this week alone?
Well, I'm wondering, I understand that. Stiglitz has said it was something, just the Iraq, it was something on $3 trillion.
Yeah, so
and that $3 trillion That's what Ev Dirksen, you're too young to remember Ev Dirksen, I suppose, when he was in the Congress. He would say, that adds up to real money. That's real money that's being spent on these things, and the thing up in Afghanistan, that's all. But I wonder, back up a little bit, talking about things. You were inspired by the classic, it would be like a Marxian view of the class struggle within the world society and so forth. And that view was held firmly to by a great number of people that informed much of the 20th century, the battle between the capitalist world, which would be the United States inheriting the mantle of Britain as the imperial power, or imperial, that, and you had the Soviet Union as a Bolshevik revolution where they had enshrined or tried to enshrine Marx, and that was set up, and it was the containment of that, the sea power and the what do you call it, the imperialism of the Western world and so forth, containing Marxism, and 50% or better of the world's population was seriously reading Karl Marx. They were inspired by the socialist ideal, which would be part of a left agenda in terms of the way to see the world. And then in 1948, China fell under Mao, and that was seen like by a lot of people as a big red amoeba coming out from the Eurasian landmass, led to our thing in Korea, I suppose, and also in Vietnam. A terrible mistake we made in Vietnam with this containment theory. And then Soviet Union imploded. And then what has happened? And I know there are people within China. I don't know if you've had a chance to visit there. I haven't, but it's.
I have.
You have. It'd be good to get your impression. But they count themselves as Marxist. They will say, we are Marxist socialists, and we represent the Marxist ideal, and yet it looks terribly like me that they've simply sold out to the capitalist ideal of having. What do you see in terms of Marxist critique or the Marxist commitment that the Communist Party of China has held, and the way that they've associated themselves so completely with the capitalists of the United States? And what does it say about the modern world at a large economic and geopolitical strategic way of thinking between the great powers of the world?
Well, I think you've asked about 4 or 5 questions
there.
Yeah,
but questions tend to be interrelated, really. But you want to have them interrelated, if possible.
Well, let me attempt to try to
if you can.
answer.
That's a big development in the world, yeah.
Yeah, but let me attempt to try to separate some of these issues and take a look at, because I think the general context of what you're talking about is globalization and the economic rivalry as we have seen the reformation of capital in China as it moves into the modern age, as it deals with a population of 1 billion people, as it deals with a population coming out almost of a feudal system, particularly in the countryside, as opposed to this new growth that has spawned as that has increase as a result of the world economy, their exports holding tight on imports into its own borders and how they control that. The U.S. complaining about the unfairness of that in terms of currency. They're able to keep their currency down. But just generally, China cannot be separated from the rest of the world. And we have seen the reformation or the restructuring of capital in Europe. We saw it with the euro and what is happening there now. The collapse of the banking system, as we have seen the collapse of the banking system here in the U.S., the social unrest that has been, that one sees every single day throughout Europe, whether it's Spain, Greece, Italy, Iceland, Ireland, and the fact that the capitalists or the corporate globalization class are demanding that the working people pay for the failure of these banks, and that's why people are hitting the streets as they talk of an austerity program. that reduces salary, longer work hours, fewer benefits, higher prices in food, higher prices in housing, and we see this all throughout Europe. I'm going to connect this to China, but again, we cannot see China in isolation with the rest of the global world. What we're seeing now, what's happening with the Tunisians hitting the street, government collapse, and I'm sure the Saudis must feel really, really uncomfortable, as well as regimes, as well as what's happening in Egypt with folks hitting the streets. Now, China clearly has a problem because the social unrest, some of it that we hear about, and some of it we don't hear about. Particularly in terms of the countryside, more and more people move into the city, fewer jobs, fewer housing, and the crisis that the country faced, despite this incredible growth spurt that is at about 8% a year, which is pretty incredible.
Even gets higher
when you
than
think
that
of
sometimes.
that. The last I read was it was about 8% of a growth. That's pretty incredible.
Consistently,
and they're trying to maintain that, hold on to it, but at the same time, they know and understand, as the president of China said, that they have to make concession to the workers and the poor in the country. How they're going to do that remains to be seen, but clearly they have to do something. And then, within the context of our discussion, we have to talk about, with respect to the scientific socialism, the breakup of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, which is now Russia, and what is happening there now, and how Russia now is competing for some kind of relationship and control of some of its former members of its union, and what's happening throughout Europe, and just what happened with Glasnost and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Some people argue that Gorbachev threw out the baby with the bathwater. I tend to be one of those people, but certainly Russia's motto of bread for everyone is no longer there when we see rising food prices, the social deterioration in the Soviet Union. I mean, in Russia, I was there. Alcoholism among teenagers was just unbelievable. And when you see the rise of this crime syndicate oligarchy, in the Soviet Union, and how they're desperately trying to hold on. And I think that's why Putin remains on the scene in some form or another as part of that shadow government. And
like a czar.
Because what we are beginning to see is this sort of domino impact of the collapse of the world economic system, because it is all interrelated, because that is what globalization is about, isn't it? But I think it's important to talk about, not about China, but the United States and what is happening here.
Okay, I was trying to see, is Marxism still relevant to understanding the future or not?
I think so.
You do. It's interesting that there is a basis for qualitative change in the name of what could be called social, political, economic revolution of transformation.
I think so.
Fundamental transformation is still possible.
Yes, I think so.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
I think the religiosity of the left that subscribes to every letter that Marx and Engels talked about as it is applicable today for our current situation, I think is a bit much. And I think that we have to take that scientific socialist principle and make it applicable to the conditions of today.
Who's doing that now intellectually? You got Bob Avakian talking about real revolution, that sort of thing, or there's people...
Well, I'm just talking about... I'm not talking about theoreticians as much as I am talking about just people generally on the left, and not in any particular...
Okay, fair enough.
Not in any particular organization or any particular person who see the application of Marxism to today's circumstances.
Right.
And I think that one cannot do that. One has to take into considerations the objective reality of our condition today,
right,
and the factor of globalization, certainly that was not around at the 1919 at the revolution in the Soviet Union, which, by the way, spawned other revolutions throughout Europe. People don't talk about that. So I think that we have to be practical and strategic in our critique and analysis of this scientific principle as it relates to the conditions of today's economic reality, and not that of 1919.
Okay, very good. Or 1917.
Or 1917.
Yeah, right. That's very good. I'm just wondering where is the impetus for that? Where do we find it? You talk about the thing in Tunisia and so forth. I thought I might have seen it in Muammar Gaddafi. I may have been wrong, but I don't know where that impetus is housed now geographically of launching. There's objective conditions that will have their own consequence, perhaps it'll emerge and so forth. But where is the intellectual leadership for that? And where is it coming from? A lot of people have said the Soviet Union imploded, that's the end of Marx, you know, or the Chinese have sold out. They're just very much of a capitalist country. They've joined the club, and they're taking care of their own. They got a plutocratic class like every political entity, and everybody's courtiers to the people that have all the power and influence, like here. And they're following our model, and there's no maybe Chavez or something.
I don't think that they're following the U.S.
You don't think so, no?
No. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. But certainly, at least in my opinion and that of others, that China offers some kind of balance to the madness of the U.S., as does Russia. Certainly not to the extent that it did Russia when it was a Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, and certainly at the height of the Still War, America was much more cautious in its exceptionalism as they pursue it today.
Yeah, there's a lot of triumphalism followed. You know, the end of history, Mr. Fukuyama said it's all over. The capitalists have won. The good guys, us, have won. And that kind of thing is in the minds of a lot of people.
Well, I mean,
because when
Ronald Reagan said, take down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev, and then it fell. Now we're looking at maybe somebody is going to say, take down that wall, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, that would put the thing into the Israeli-Middle East thing. That's very important.
But we're using some comparative analysis here in terms of take down the wall and what we are looking at and what is happening in the rest of the world. But just getting back, I wanted to say something about conditions here, because I think that might be relevant. We are expecting that President Obama, in his State of the Union address, might address the issue, I believe it's on the 20th, might address the issue of Social Security. Now, he put Social Security on the chopping block before the Republicans. Now, already many people on Social Security have not gotten a cost of living increase for the past two years.
2 years anyway.
The past 2 years, and more than likely they won't get it next year as well.
They're going to start attacking it if the people on the right have their base.
Because and the president has given every indication that, in fact, he is willing to go along with the program. And we saw evidence of that in the Deficit Reduction Commission that was established by the president and loaded with folks, with members of that commission who are calling for an austerity program, not taxing the rich,
for the poor,
not taxing, not cutting off military spending, but looking at austerity program
for the
that
poor.
will cut domestic programs to the bare bone.
Yeah.
And then just recently,
and beyond, perhaps even let them really suffer, and then they'll line up. That kind of thing. That's a traditional way for these plutocrats to operate. Yeah.
And then beyond that, just this week alone, President Obama had a piece in the Wall Street Journal where he talked about the need for deregulation of corporations and businesses and other entities so as to stimulate growth, so that business owners and corporations would not be unencumbered by these guidelines.
Actually, that they needn't be encumbered by any kind of concerns for wages, living wage or ecology. They could just be free to do whatever they want.
So they would be unencumbered by these regulations.
Okay,
and then when you look at deregulations and how it led to the worst disasters we have seen to date, the BBP oil spill, the horrific and horrendous accidents, not accidents just because it was really because of lack of regulations in the coal mines, and that has led to deaths. And so or the deregulation of the internet neutrality.
Yeah, it's under attack.
And that is to loosen the regulations. So for the president to talk about deregulation when in fact he ran on a platform of regulations that are needed to protect the lives and the income of Americans, it really is, in my opinion, quite a portrayal of the people.
You're friends with Cynthia McKinney?
Yes, I know Cynthia. We talked.
As well. Yeah, Cynthia is there. She's done a lot of things. She's on that ship going to Gaza and all that kind of thing. She's really a good voice. We went to a thing with Mr. Ahmadinejad when he was here. I don't know if you went to that.
No, I didn't go to that. I was working on a Cuba project.
It was like an old home week. Everybody was there. A whole lot of the old gang were there.
Yeah, that was true. It
was interesting to me.
Yeah, it was really very interesting, and I meant to address the bellicosity coming out of Washington about attacking Iran. Israel leading that call for an attack against Iran. But speaking of the president himself, Ahmadinejad, I'm really troubled by the fact that this is a man who had a conference in which he invited David Duke when he was going through his Holocaust denial period, something that President Fidel Castro addressed, and telling him to, why don't you sort of be quiet so we can really deal with the Americans coming after you. So I didn't see that dinner as being politically significant.
Where would there be? We have a political order where you have Mr. Obama, you have China, you have Russia, Putin, this, we have that, we have India. We have South America. We have that. Where is there, if there is a, let's just put it this way, a international interconnected plutocracy, autocratic, oligarchic ruling, assets are very tiny. The asset ownership of the assets, the capital assets, is a tiny plutocratic class. I think 2%. On Mr. Bush's first tax cut is too generous. I think it was more like one fraction of 1% where all the gain went. To upper one, Paul Krugman said 1/100th of 1% is where the real gain went. To the 1/100th of 1%. So every political economy in the world is controlled by a tiny plutocratic class, it would seem, who own all the assets. The people are rather... I
don't think that's true in Cuba.
You don't? Where in Cuba? Okay, that's what I was looking for.
I think that's a difference. I don't think it's true in Venezuela.
Okay, good. That's what I was looking for. Where, if that's the case with the so-called international community, as it's referred to by people who are trying to assert that, where is there effective opposition for qualitative transformation of an inordinately organized, unjust situation, which is characteristic of virtually the entire world, other than a couple of examples we can mention. Where is the impetus for a qualitative transformation that could inform, and what are the historical developments or consequences in a larger order that might compel massive numbers of people to become interested in a qualitative transformation that could bring universal justice to the masses of the people of the world that has never been given.
Well, I think
and also with a firm connection to the larger context of ecology. Where is that impetus to come from if it's not going to be coming from the people that we see on the news all the time as representing the historical legitimate order?
Well, I don't think I would agree with that. I think we're going to see a qualitative transformation springing from the streets and from the people themselves.
Well, I meant that, but where?
But just let me continue.
Sorry, yeah.
I think, number one, that's what we're going to see.
Okay.
We're beginning to see a peep of that in Haiti. We're getting,
really?
I think with the mass demonstrations that have taken place, the mass demonstrations in which people, these grassroots movements are calling for an overturn of the elections, that the elections should be voided, that they're bogus. The same group that's calling for the arrest of Baby Doc Duvalier, Jean-Claude Duvalier.
Right, Baby Doc.
I think we're seeing that. I think certainly we see it in the support of Chavez and the attempts by the oligarchy in Venezuela to overthrow him, and how that coup was stopped, and the continuous support of the president. I think we
Evo
see
Morales,
it.
perhaps?
I think. Well, I was going to continue throughout Latin America, because Latin America for a long time was considered the backyard of the U.S.
Absolutely.
And those politics have shifted considerably with the election of Evo Morales, the woman who's the president of Brazil. So we've seen some real changes there, and that I don't believe that people are going to go backwards. And it's almost imagining that the gusanos who have waged their deadly assault against Cuba, really believing that on the death of Castro, Fidel Castro or Raul Castro, they're going to march back into Cuba and take it over. And I think that's absurd. People are not going to turn back to the almost slave wage workers' poverty that they were subjected to for centuries. People are not going to do that. But on another note, I think it's important to have an example of what we're talking about, for example, in Harlem, which is what I want to talk about.
Okay, good,
And Harlem, in its final gentrification assault, which is the capture of 125th Street, Harlem's main commercial corridor, from river to river. Now, Mayor Bloomberg, as even the New York Times has been quick to admit, wants a whiter New York, and particularly a whiter Manhattan. And Manhattan is considered one of 5 or 7 cities whose growth has not been affected by the economic crisis. I'm not quite sure I understand that.
I don't either.
But that was something that I read. I'm not quite sure I understand or agree with that.
Yeah, give it a little time to settle in.
But one of the things that we know about Harlem, as it is in the real estate industry, is vital as in economic development, and developers are vital to the capture of Harlem. Now, one of the in Harlem, I think the managerial class there, along with Mayor Bloomberg, really at Mayor Bloomberg's vision of the city and these neighborhood enclaves that traditionally had concentrations of people of color, whether it's Willets Point, working class people, business interests, whether it's Harlem, parts of Bedford-Stuyvesant, Williamsburg, the Bronx, and that if there is a major transportation hub, he wants the kind of development that will attract the tourism. So they're looking at hotels and universities.
5-star hotels would be good. 6-star hotels.
Well, I don't think they're looking at 5 and 6 stories. What they want is
6 stars. I'm
6
saying.
stars.
For the elite.
Yeah, for the elite. But I don't think that is certainly they're not looking at a dump because they're looking at new construction.
Okay, right.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a 6-star hotel.
Yeah, okay.
But what they're looking for is the development of this commercial corridor so that they can perfect Harlem as a tourist destination that they say will stimulate the economy and create jobs. But we know that the jobs that these development projects will create are, for the most part, part-time jobs, very few benefits, and that the workers of Harlem, and about, I would say, at least 50% of black men in Harlem, as it has been documented by the Community Service Society, which is a think tank, that in its study of a number of years ago that put New York City's black male unemployment at nearly 50%.
Unstable.
And a more recent study in fact indicated that only 1 out of 4 young black men between the age of 18 and 24 has a job, and that's 1 in 4. So I was listening. I listened the other day to Mayor Bloomberg's state of the city.
A big talk,
well, I didn't think I thought it was interesting that the applause was only lukewarm. But he talked about the 50,000 jobs that had been created and this new business initiative that he's initiated with, among the worst, Columbia University, as well as NYU and other entities, and they're going to create these business center to offer businesses loans and support and technical support to small businesses. Now, Columbia University, in its expansion, displaced any number of local small businesses through eminent domain. In Central Harlem, 71 local businesses displaced on 125th Street, and that's in Central Harlem. With the East 125th Street Development Project, more local businesses being displaced through the use of eminent domain. And eminent domain and the compensation received through eminent domain is never never reflects the true value of the property, because you cannot calculate the future value and revenue of the business based on this. Because how can you?
That's one indication from Harlem. I get others. We did a program with Cornelius Ricks today and Paul Kierson, and that the demographics or the statistics that come out again about Harlem or about black and brown, New York City, everything. Prison population, harassment on the street, foster care, take away children. Everything is black and brown up in the 80 and 90 percentile. It is unconscionable, and it is absolutely inexplicable in any kind of way that should be accepted by anybody.
Harlem is one of 7 neighborhoods that feed its young black and Latino population into the prison, into the upstate prison industrial complex. In this city, with the our mayor, which is the richest, Mayor Bloomberg, the richest person in New York City, if you want to receive food stamps, you have to be fingerprinted. I mean, that, speaking of something that's unconscionable, I mean, that is
but you think this might be, we were talking before, but I know you talked with Barron, right? Or you people in the city council. Who is it, Barron?
Yes.
Yeah, good guy.
Very good guy.
Very good guy.
Very
and he's
good
standing
guy.
with you.
And the Freedom Party.
And the Freedom Party.
And the Freedom Party, I think, is creating a third-party alternative to that of the Democratic and the Republican Party. I think is extremely important in terms of building that power base that is so badly needed in communities of colors to address the very issues that you laid out: police brutality, harassment,
it's across the board.
The criminal injustice center, the foster care abuse, and so that's why the Freedom Party, I think, is so important. But let me just quickly say something about Columbia University.
We ought to get a sense of the timing here, because I lost track of it. We ought to let me know, Josh, when we get toward the end, if you can. Yeah.
Okay. Columbia University, the third largest landlord in the city, its development project, the expansion of its campus from 125th to 133rd, from 12th Avenue to Broadway. They are going to bulldoze most of that site. The Supreme Court recently refused to hear the eminent domain challenge of Nick Spray-Reagan, one of the business owners who was represented by Norm Siegel. So that was the last obstacle to Columbia University's expansion. And so what we're going to see is Columbia University really being one of the powers of Harlem that makes decisions.
Is it 3 minutes? Is that it? 3 minutes? Yes? Okay, we got 3 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry, I lost track of the time. Yeah, okay, well, that means we got 3 minutes left, so we ought to round it out a little bit. It's great talking to you, and absolutely right.
Thank you.
And that could be a place where it's so, the speech of Martin King could that he referred to Mississippi, could refer to Harlem in a very real sense, and it could be the discontent and the inoperability of the system that's asked the nation and the world to accept. It is not adequate to what the future requires. There is qualitative change needed. Call it revolution, call it massive, appropriate transformation of the whole social political order is still alive and well. It might come from places like Harlem. It might come from places like, you say, Chavez. And
I think it's going to come from all over the world, and it's going to come from the people. But let me just quickly say something about Martin Luther King's day, that Martin Luther King that we just celebrated. Martin Luther King, at the time of his death, stood firmly, without doubt and question, against wars.
Against Vietnam, particularly.
Against Vietnam.
After 67,
against the Vietnam War.
He took a lot of heat for that,
He said that the U.S. was the greatest purveyor of violence than any nation in the world.
He had it right.
I think he had it right.
And
but let me
make
my final point. So I attended a number of programs and read about so many different programs. Not a single leader addressed King's opposition to the Vietnam War, to the ecumenical community's opposition to wars that we currently have. Wars that we are spending $1 trillion a year on. More money that we spent in all of the Cold Wars. The U.S. is spending $725 billion annually. They just passed the 211 Pentagon budget. And China only pays $80 million a year. And so if we don't come to grips with dealing with this post-racial American paradigm that has been promoted and talked about and propagandized as a result of the U.S. first black president, Barack Obama, then we are not going to move ahead. As Dr. King said, we must judge a man by the content of his character, not his skin, and that applies to President Barack Obama.
Very good. Color of the skin or racism is one part of it, but it's also got a very much of a class concept, and that there's the inappropriateness of what they are asking us to accept out of history and reify is inappropriate to what the future requires. The roots of qualitative transformation are still there in the inadequacy of what they have for their view of the future, that is the leaders of the world, and revolution is still in the air.
It will always be there as long as people continue to struggle, because struggle is a life and death situation for most of the people.